Just a few minutes ago, Barbara played in our reflection, Lo, How a Rose Ere Blooming. And as I thought about this morning, looking ahead, knowing that she would be playing it, knowing that we'll be hearing it as a part of our reflection in just a few minutes, I looked into a little bit more about that classic Christmas carol. It comes to us from the German En ist ein Ros entsprungen, and that's inspired by Isaiah 11:1. Isaiah's poetry has long influenced Christian songs. And even though I'm going to focus on Isaiah 61, which comes from what scholars call Third Isaiah, this reference to First Isaiah in our meditation reminds me of what God's Spirit does, especially during this season. As a song, Lo, How a Rose goes way back. It kind of traces its origins to the 8th century when Cosmas, the melodist, a Greek ecclesiastical poet, wrote a hymn in the 8th century called Ravdos ek tis Rizes, which means root of the rod of Jesse. But that poem traveled forward, and by the 15th century, it evolved into Lo, How a Rose, coming to us through Germany. Isaiah's message, and all of the messages we find in Isaiah, are for the Hebrew people coming out of exile, and they can speak to our understanding of God incarnate. Jesus, the poetry that leads to inspiring Christmas carols, reminds us of God's continuing revelation. It reminds us of the ongoing and unfolding work of the Spirit, working in people's lives, including the way we tell the Christmas story. The story is all about love. Jesus' birth reminds us that there's more to life than meets the eye, and change is possible. These are common themes in many of the Christmas and holiday stories. Often we see these stories in movies, and even the secular ones that have nothing to do with Jesus point to something deeper, something richer in this season. You could pick any movie. You could really take a stab at anything. That new feature on Netflix of just play something, which I don't know how that algorithm works, but you could take almost any of the Christmas movies you find, and you could see how they point to this deeper, more profound message. Let's, for example, look at It's a Wonderful Life. George Bailey eventually, in the end, realizes that things weren't so bad. Or if we take Christmas Carol, Ebenezer Scrooge is transformed after a visit from some ghosts. Another somewhat, well, more recent than the previous two Christmas movie, Love Actually, reminds us in both the beginning and the end that love is actually all around us. And then jumping back to the 60s, another example, the Charlie Brown Christmas has, well, a more explicit attack on commercialism. It's not subtle at all if you go back and rewatch that from the 60s. But the Peanuts gang in the end reads the Christmas story from the Gospel of Luke. But in each of these stories, there's something bigger than just buying presents or beautiful decorations. Despite everything that's wrong in the world, George Bailey sees that life is pretty good. People can change, even Ebenezer Scrooge, and love is around us. And Jesus, in many of the stories, is the centerpiece of the season. At first, the message in Isaiah 61 feels a bit incongruent with these common Christmas themes. The passage includes these things like liberty for the captives, the Jubilee year of God's favor, comfort for those who mourn, as Val highlighted in her morning prayer, a Lord who loves justice. All of these things are harder hitting and maybe a little bit more real than the beauty of love being all around us or wonderful decorations. Isaiah 61 seems like the kind of thing that we should read after Christmas. Let's get through the beauty. Let's get through the amazing music that we hear. It's good for when we're done with presents and celebrations and ready to get back to work. But maybe there's a better entry point into these verses. You see, Luke's grown-up Jesus quotes this passage when he makes his first appearance in the synagogue. I know that we haven't even reached Jesus' birth when we're going to put that baby in the manger, but the liberty, the year of Jubilee, in comfort for mourners, is love in action. It's Scrooge making things right. It's recognizing the good we see in the world and the love that is still evident, as testified by those workers who were out tirelessly transporting the vaccine this morning out of Michigan. Third, Isaiah challenges us to think a bit differently about God's love. In Isaiah 61, Jesus lived, in Isaiah 61 and in Jesus' lived example of it, God's love is a lived experience, something reflected in one's life. It's a quality of life that's right here, right now. When Jesus raised the scroll in Luke, he wasn't thinking pie in the sky or something exclusively about eternity. When Jesus said, "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me," he meant that something is happening right now. Isaiah 61 talks about healing and freedom, being released from bondage, and God's comfort right now. This passage is part of this larger section in Isaiah 60 to 62. And the section anticipates Zion's magnificent future. We can apply that hope and anticipation to our lives, even if we don't feel it quite yet. This season provides us with the opportunity to get ready for the coming of the Lord. Think about that idea of getting ready. Ready for what? What does the coming of the Lord mean? What does it look like? Whenever I get ready for something, I'm attuned to that for which I prepare. Before we worship, we try to center ourselves. We, as the ministers, we get together and pray. But if I'm getting ready to do something else, it's the same for anything. If I'm getting ready to go to a concert, can you imagine going to a concert with other people? Well, once upon a time, when we gathered and we went to concerts, I thought about that as I was thinking about getting ready and how I would prepare by thinking about whatever we were going to see, the artist or the musicians or the composer. It's the same no matter what we do. If you're getting ready to go hiking, check the weather, make sure all of the hiking accoutrements are in order. No matter what we do, we're vigilant to that thing for which we prepare. And right now we're getting ready for Christmas. I'm not talking about sending cards or buying gifts. I'm talking about getting ready for Jesus. Throughout the Gospels, we see Jesus focused on the named recipients of good news in Isaiah 61. The oppressed, the brokenhearted, the captives, prisoners, mournful. These are the people listed in this passage. And when we look at Jesus' ministry in the Gospels, we see that these are the primary recipients of his work. If our faith extends beyond the baby who we're going to place in this manger on Christmas Eve, then we need to focus on these same people. We need to focus on the oppressed. We need to focus our attention on the brokenhearted, the captives, prisoners, and mournful. To follow that path, we have to get ready. In Isaiah 61, we see the prophet take some old ideas and shape them in new ways. The Exodus, coming out, freedom, the year of Jubilee. These are all ideas that we've seen previously in Hebrew Scripture, but Isaiah, or this section of Isaiah, takes them and turns them around, and there's a lot to do in this passage. Reading it passively misses the point. Likewise, approaching Christmas without considering all that God incarnate means for humanity misses the point. The passage in Isaiah challenges cultural Christianity. It flies in the face of people who want a non-threatening gospel. The gospel is threatening. Not in a violent way, but because it changes us into the people who shine with the love of Christ. We get ready in this season because the Lord comes to liberate us too. To free us from our sin. To set us free from those things that hold us down. To lead us into a new life from those things that bind us. That's pretty amazing. We're both liberated and we're liberators. We're both freed from our own captivity and we get to participate in freeing others from theirs. Jesus said, "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me." And we can listen to those words in awe, but then we can turn around and repeat those words because the Spirit of the Lord is upon us too. And when it is, we're part of God's work. What does the Spirit do? It works through us and creates this lived salvation we see here in Isaiah and again throughout the Scriptures. Along the way, we face a variety of challenges, and goodness knows this year's been full of them. I can't think of anyone who has escaped having to deal with this pandemic in some way. Looking back, though, can help us see that even the darkest moments don't last forever. Lo, how a rose ere blooming came to us, as I mentioned, through the German text. Well, in the 1930s in Germany, the Nazis could not abide a Christmas carol that had such an explicit, inextricable dependence on the relationship between Christianity and Judaism. So some Nazis rewrote it, obviously. Und ist ein Licht erstanden in einer dunklen Winternacht. A light has arisen for us on a dark winter night. It totally secularized the song. This bastardization was about sunlight on the fatherland. And it was a praise for motherhood. And that's not bad by itself. There's nothing horrible about that. It's just not what Lo, how a rose ere blooming is about. So it's easy to miss the depth of God's calling. It's just so easy to miss the point. All of us can make little compromises, and gradually we discover that we're no longer moving in faith, living in faith, and animated by the Spirit. We've drifted into some sort of cultural Christianity, and we're going through the motions, and we're doing what we've always done before. And at that point, church is a little different than a club. Lo, how a rose ere blooming has then become a light has risen for us. We don't have to let that happen. We don't have to surrender the depth of following Jesus. We don't have to give up the meaning of the love of Christ. We can get ready for Christmas. Not the sanitized, happy, clappy Christmas of Hallmark movies. And I'm not against Hallmark movies. I've enjoyed them more this year than I think I ever have. And I don't understand that, but somebody else can psychoanalyze that, explain it to me. We can get ready for the real Christmas, the real baby in the manger, the real God with us. We can prepare to encounter Christ in a new way, to be moved and to allow Him to liberate us from that which binds us. Then, when we're following Jesus, living out the love that came down at Christmas, we can become liberators, joining Jesus in His work here and now. Inspired by the Spirit, we can work that which is good among all people. This season, be inspired. Be inspired to be the love, to be a love of Christ that is active, moving and living in this world. Reclaim your faith, not one of culture, not one of going through the motions, but one of transformation. Look to the future with hope, because there is hope. Be the love of Christ in the world this season. Amen.